Chapter 8. Su Fengnian laughed and said, "Don't worry, I won't forget to treat you to the best and most expensive Huadiao wine. Let's go." Su Fengnian had just walked out of the stable with the old groom when he saw the old Taoist priest who claimed to be an immortal. He didn't need to guess to know that the old swindler was here to ask him to persuade his younger brother to go to Mount Longhu to learn martial arts. 12 years ago, it was Su Fengnian who let his dog bite the old Taoist priest. Because his mother believed in Buddhism, His Royal Highness, who didn't believe in destiny, was still respectful to monks. However, when he saw a fortune-teller on the street, he would definitely make a mess. The old Taoist priest of Mount Longhu was really unlucky. Back then the old Taoist priest, who was slovenly and covered in lice, passed the first stage and almost lost his virginity. The beginning of that meeting was very unpleasant, but the end was still sloppy. Su Fengnian didn't forget to lecture the old Taoist priest of Mount Longhu in private before he left. "Old man, if you want to cheat people of their money, you should at least give up some money to get a decent set of clothes. Those Taoist priests in the supernatural novels all wear yellow crowns and Taoist robes. They can immediately ascend to the immortal stage with just one fart. Don't you want to learn? If you come to the palace like this again, I'll let my dog bite you again." It seemed that the old Taoist priest with the surname Zhao had learned his lesson. He really did change into a brand new Taoist robe and a yellow crown on his head. He even added a simple peachwood sword. Wherever he went, he would receive looks of respect that he had never received in the first half of his life. This made the old Taoist priest, who was usually expressionless on the mountain for decades, very happy. Su Fengnian put his arm around the old Taoist priest's shoulder and said softly, "Ox-nosed Taoist, it's a good thing that my younger brother is going to Mount Longhu. However, your Mount Longhu has formed a good relationship with my father. Don't you have anything to say? Otherwise, why would my younger brother go to Mount Wudong to learn martial arts? Why would he go to that god-forsaken place? The scenery of Mount Wudong is very good. I can visit it every now and then." The old Taoist priest looked embarrassed. He looked around and saw that no one was around. Then, he quietly reached into his pocket and took out an old and yellowed book. He said reluctantly, "This is the Dragon Swordplay Manual." He didn't expect that he would turn on him. He didn't even look at the manual. He pointed to the Tide Listening Pavilion and said, "Dragon, you bastard. You. Do you think I need to go to another place to find a secret manual to practice or use martial arts? You. Don't you think it's embarrassing?" They were both old men who had lived for 60 to 70 years, but old Huang was very perceptive. He curled his lips and laughed along with his highness. Only then did the old Taoist remember that there was a tide-listening pavilion in the prince's mansion that was known as the Arsenal. He suddenly understood and withdrew his hand awkwardly. "Then what should we do?" Su Fengnian lowered his voice and said, "Are there any young and pretty Taoist nuns in Mount Longhu? It's okay if they're a bit older, but they can't be over 35. If they're older, they'll be old. No matter how well they take care of themselves, they won't have the charm of a middle-aged woman." "Ah!" the old Taoist priest exclaimed in surprise. Su Fengnian raised his eyebrows and asked, "What? You don't have any? Or are you not willing?" The old Taoist priest seemed to be in a dilemma. But in a few blinks of an eye, he whispered, "There are some, but they're all my brother's disciples and grand-disciples. I'd rather have no disciples than have substandard ones. That's why I have very few disciples. But since the Crown Prince wants to study Taoism, I don't mind recommending 1 or 2 female juniors." Su Fengnian patted the old Taoist priest's shoulder and gave him a thumbs up. "You're right." The old Taoist priest began to recite the 3-5 imperial scriptures to atone for his sins. "Grandmaster, please don't blame me. I'm doing this for the sake of Mount Longhu's 1,000-year plan." Then the old Taoist priest, one of the 3 celestial masters of Mount Longhu, said anxiously, "You have to pick an auspicious time to take in a disciple. If you don't hurry to Mount Longhu today, you'll miss it. It won't be appropriate for the young prince." Su Fengnian frowned. "Right away." Celestial Master Zhao nodded with an anxious expression. "Right away." Su Fengnian, who originally wanted to take his younger brother on a hunting trip, took a deep breath and ordered old Huang to wait on the street outside the mansion. He then took the ox-nosed Taoist priest, who didn't look like a celestial master at all, to find his beloved younger brother, Su Longxiang. 100 steps away from the stable, The old Taoist priest turned his head and looked at the old coachman who was smiling foolishly at the side of the stable. His heavy footsteps finally became lighter. When Su Fengnian arrived at his younger brother's courtyard, he found him squatting on the ground and looking at ants again. He walked over and patted his head. Stop looking. The ants on Mount Longhu are even bigger. Go there and look. Learn your skills and go down the mountain as soon as possible. Bring me a bag of wild hawthorns. Do you hear me? The young prince was truly a fool. He stood up and nodded heavily. He smiled again, but of course, he was drooling again. The old Taoist priest was flabbergasted. How could such a difficult matter be settled so easily? The great pillar state, who had once turned the entire Jianghu upside down, had tried his best to persuade this disciple of his. Su Fengnian wiped his saliva and scolded jokingly. Stupid Huang man, look. Did you see that? This person will be your master from now on. When you reach Mount Longhu, you can beat anyone you want, but just don't hit this old man. If anyone dares to bully you and call you an idiot, then beat them to death. If you can't beat them, then get your master to write a letter. This elder brother will lead our northern Liang cavalry and charge 2,000 li up Mount Longhu. Remember, don't get bullied. In this world, only us brothers and two sisters have the right to bully others. Su Longxiang seemed to have understood but not fully, and nodded. The old Taoist priest was scared out of his wits. With Su Fengnian taking action, Su Longxiang didn't resist at all. The prince's residence didn't drag things out either. With his foster son Qi Dangua leading the way, 40 elite cavalry escorting them, and several capable people raised by the Bailiang Palace secretly keeping an eye on them. There was also a Taoist master from Mount Longhu. It was likely that no one would dare to mess with them. As they were about to leave, Crown Prince Su Fengnian stood in front of his younger brother and said softly, "Stupid Huang man, I won't be able to wipe your saliva in the future. But I promise you that I'll continue to help you find the most beautiful woman in the world to be your wife. If she doesn't want to, I'll tie her up and bring her into the bridal chamber." The young man who was blessed by the heavens to obtain the strength of the dragon elephant was stupid. His heart wasn't open, but it didn't mean that he didn't have any feelings. On the contrary, in some aspects, his feelings were especially strong. For example, he was the second person in the world besides his mother who would wipe his saliva for him. When he was 14 years old, Su Fengnian caused a great disaster. De Zhugua, who usually didn't hit or scold his children, almost took out an iron whip and smashed it on his most beloved son. No one dared to persuade him or stop him. It was only the stupid Huang man who stood in front of his brother and didn't yield an inch. Su Fengnian's eyes turned red. He turned to the old Taoist priest and said word by word, "Zhao Niobi, I've said it before. Don't let anyone bully Huang man. Although I, Su Fengnian, am an unscrupulous hedonist who doesn't have the strength to truss a chicken, you should know the consequences." The old Taoist priest smiled awkwardly and nodded with a bitter smile. The group gradually left. Su Fengnian and his father, Su Xiao, didn't send them all the way out of the city. Su Fengnian found old Huang who was standing beside the jade lion. He smiled and said, "I'm not in the mood to drink today. How about later?" The old servant's smile was simple and bright. His old face was like a large patch of reeds that could only be seen in the wilderness. It couldn't be said to be charming or magnificent, but it had its own feelings. It was like a jar of old wine that had been sealed for many, many years.